Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We appreciate you. I see chat is working. I appreciate all of you who've been here for some of the earlier Empower Hours, bearing with us as we learn how to use Zoom webinar. It's been a journey, and some of you have been on that journey with us, so thank you. I think we've worked out most of the kinks. So just wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight. Everything we do is brought to you by you and your support of us and our programs. We work really hard to be able to provide Empower Hours like tonight for free. But if you do have the ability to make a donation, Zoom webinar is unfortunately not free. So your donations do help keep the lights on, the Zoom running, all of those things. And we will actually be splitting the donations that we received tonight with Nikki and Take Back Trust. So we both appreciate you. So to sort of kick us off and give some context here, I think for a lot of us, the Dobbs decision was a huge turning point for a lot of the folks I know that, recently got into politics or who are younger and got into politics. For me, it definitely was. I didn't have anything really to do with politics. I was involved in, LGBTQ actions and things like that with different groups, but I wasn't involved in politics. I didn't really pay very much attention to it. It was, a fairly privileged position, but, wasn't active, wasn't being an activist. And then Dobbs fell. And I remember where I was when Dobbs fell, or when Roe v. Wade fell, when the Dobbs decision came down. Because I was on the phone with a coworker and I said, I need to hang up now. And that was for me like the start of my political journey, right? Like that's the birth of what has become Dem, was me waking up and realizing like I don't have the same rights that I did, a day ago, a week ago, a year ago. And that's a problem and we need to do something about it. And so I started getting involved. I started going to protests on the square. I started meeting people. And then I found out that there were people collecting signatures for reproductive rights to get it on the ballot to, what then became issue 1. So I was like, great, sign me up. How do I get involved? And a lot of the people that I met through that are, the people you see on this call or the people that you've seen at your Dem meetings, are people who helped, collect signatures and, pass out literature about what issue 1 was, postcard parties. And that is actually where I met Shelley. So Shelley, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Shelley Ray, and I did meet Belinda and an assortment of the Dem group via the fall of Roe and the Dobbs decision. And that's really what ignited our 3 original mavens when we decided that we were going to do something. And it was a good thing that we kind of reacted the way we did, because Ohio was following the lead of Michigan, who had protected and secured reproductive freedom in their state. And we knew that there was going to be some legislation that was going to be a citizen-led initiative. And so the 3 of us turned into a meeting, which turned into more people, which turned into an entire posse of people who really hung out on the square to collect those signatures. And so that ignited me. I have heard Nikki say this before, where people say they don't do politics, but politics does you. Well, it does. And so I do think that that's how a lot of us, perhaps, that are on this call tonight really got that fire in our belly and decided what we were going to do was not sit on the sidelines. And that's kind of how the Mavens were born. We have 4 leaders now. One who is Laura, who is now the new state director for Ohio for Red, Wine, and Blue, which we're thrilled about. She's got 1 week under her belt. And we are pushing 400 on our private Facebook page, and we are in the neighborhood of 600 locally getting our emails. So people are paying attention, and we're really grateful for that. So how I met my friend Nikki, and I want to read the official piece about Nikki because I think that's really important. But she is my friend, and I will tell you how she became my friend. But Nikki is a very seasoned OBGYN PA, a content creator, and the founder of Take Back Trust. It is a direct to patient empowerment platform dedicated to helping people navigate reproductive health care in an ever changing landscape. Don't we know it? She is a fierce advocate for reproductive rights. She spent a decade working on the front lines of reproductive care, both state and nationally, with leaders in both state, nationally, and local, and is trying to protect that essential piece. So I met Nikki by seeing her content when she did a really amazing thing that literally showed up in my newsfeed because my newsfeed was very curated to women's empowerment things and reproductive rights and advocating for children and education. And all of a sudden, this delightful young woman was dancing around in her front yard with her pink lawn signs. And I looked at her and was just beside myself with joy of seeing somebody who was making our mess, our collective mess, a message, and really pushing back on everything. So all I did, and my friends who know me know this is how I roll, I will randomly message people and just say, I love what you're doing, or thank you for doing what you're doing, or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get a response back. You just hope that somebody knows that you're out there and you care. Nikki messaged me back, and we messaged back and forth. We discovered that we could meet, and we did. And that is really how all those pink Kamalon signs made their way to Ohio, because she just decided to have her printer ship them directly to me. So that is Nikki. She is amazing, and we're really lucky to have her with us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction, both of you. And thank you, Dem, for having me here tonight. I think what is so important is finding community. And Shelley, what you just said of turning a mess into a message is something that really resonates deeply. And I think that's what so many of us are feeling right now. And I think part of what was so fun in the fall is we felt hopeful and there was joy. And I think now it really does feel like a mess. And so how do we turn that mess into a message is such a rallying cry. And I think when you think of it that way, it gives you a little bit of freedom to say, okay, it is a freaking mess. And it's okay that it's a mess, but let's find some, shared values and shared community within that mess to drive us forward, so we don't just throw our hands up in the air and kind of give up, because that's the easiest thing to do right now, right? And so for whatever reason it was that drew you in, somebody else called it being voluntold that you're going to do these things, and that really resonates with me as well. Everybody has a reason that they're more active now in politics and policy than they were 5 to 10 years ago. And so I think that it's so special to be able to come together in community, whether it's local community or a digital community like we're having here tonight, and just take an hour to brainstorm ways that we can turn this mess into some sort of a message, so that we can continue to kind of live through this mess a little bit more gracefully, knowing that there are others around us who feel the same, right? And I think that that's such a powerful piece. So yeah, as Shelley had shared, I've been an OBGYN physician assistant for over a decade. I'm originally from California, but I live in the state of Michigan now. I went to Michigan undergrad, so I'm a Wolverine. But I think that that was part of my advocacy journey, is that I had come from a state where I had seen liberal policy and politics, and then I came to Michigan and really took it for granted. And all of a sudden I'd look around and be like, oh, this isn't, this isn't a given. We have to fight for this. And having had the experience within the clinic, I said, I kind of know what this looks like in the clinic, and I want to take that in-clinic experience and share that experience with other people. And so that has really brought me into reproductive rights advocacy work. And I work with our local abortion funds, which, if you have additional funds to donate, abortion funds are like the most essential and critical thing right now, providing just like on the ground support, whether it be logistics or cost for abortion care. And it's a super, super critical thing. So we'll kind of talk through all the things. We came up with a really great plan for tonight, and I'm just excited to be here. So
Very good. Very good. Well, do we want to just dive into some of the questions, or do you want to talk a little bit about how you pivoted from your clinician work to Take Back Trust? Like that, your origin story for how you are doing what you're doing right now is pretty interesting, I think.
yeah, so I'll share a little bit more about the pink lawn signs that made their way all the way into Ohio, and they were in all 7 swing states as well. So we had printed and distributed over 15,000 comma lawn signs. And essentially that started in a movement of joy, in a movement of optimism, in a leaning in, and seeing a gap and seeing a need and deciding that you have the ability to fill it. So that was kind of what had happened there. Is the same day that Biden endorsed Kamala Harris, I ordered one sign from CVS, the local CVS by me, that was printed that same day within 3 hours, and I had it staked into my front yard that very night that he endorsed her. Essentially saying, I want to throw my full sign of support behind her. I want to be a leader rather than a follower in this. I don't want to wait for other people to, do these things and look at each other and see what they think and let the rumblings kind of happen. I want to start those rumblings, right? And I think that that was some of the original power behind that Kamalan movement. Donna asked if somebody could share a pic of the sign, so maybe someone could drop them in there. But they were pink signs, and essentially one said Kamala Harris for president with a big feminist logo, and they were pink, and another one said, we must be a nation that trusts women. And that has kind of become the rallying cry for me. And the trusting of women, where that comes from actually is Dr. George Tiller. Shelley, I don't know if you even know the story. Dr. George Tiller was a late-term abortion doctor, and he did tremendous, amazing work within the abortion community, and he was murdered in his church in the 90s.
Didn't know that.
And he wore a pin on his white coat every day that said, trust women. And then Kamala Harris was the first sitting vice president to ever visit an abortion clinic. And when she left the abortion clinic, she had that quote of, we must be a nation that trusts women, which was a direct ode to Dr. George Tiller. And so that trusting of women, obviously those of us who are in the movement, we try to use more inclusive language than just women. So there's that, right? Birthing people, all of the things. But when we center it to trusting a person in their medical and healthcare decisions, that was really what I rallied behind, and what kind of became the start of a very fun advocacy journey this fall. I ended up doing content creation. I was part of the Creators for Kamala Harris movement this fall as well, which was really cool because I got to just be a part of all of the momentum within our state, which was so fun. So then when we had lost the election, within 2 days, I decided that I was going to start this website, Take Back Trust. And the goal of it was, okay, we must be a nation that trusts women. And we just freaking proved that we don't, right? And so how do we take back that trust? What are the things that we can do to plug ourselves in, to trust one another, to trust ourselves, to get our doctors to trust us, to get our politicians to trust us? How do we take back trust? And so that was kind of where that name came from. And we launched that website within 10 days that does patient education and empowerment. If you are looking for any sort of guidance on your reproductive health care journey, whether it be fertility planning, contraceptive discussion, perimenopause management, kind of the whole spectrum, it has a provider visit planner where you can plug those things in, come up with questions to ask your care provider at the next visit, and it punts it into a PDF that you can either screenshot or print to bring with you to the upcoming visit. And the goal of that is, we know sex ed is atrocious in our country, and we know that sex ed is going to get worse, unfortunately. And so we're lacking such critical information from a healthcare standpoint, and we're lacking really patient empowerment from a reproductive healthcare standpoint. So the goal of Take Back Trust is kind of to bridge that and help increase health literacy within the space, kind of encouraging us to take back that trust that our country doesn't have in us, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. I remember several days after the election and having a conversation with you on the phone, kind of crying on the phone. And then and what's wild is, I don't know if Leah is on this call, but I had pulled out of Leah's driveway, dropping off signs at her house, and I had left her house and called you, or you called me, and we had this conversation, and you had immediately pivoted to what you were going to do. And we were mad about it. And that, rather than feeling despair, you just really decided that your expertise and everything was going to still continue to do good. I'm amazed at how fast you pivoted. And pivot is our word of the year. We kind of love the word pivot around here right now. But that is it is a powerful trait for people, and not everyone is doing it well right now, but you definitely are with this, because it's been an unrecognized need for women's healthcare. I mean, I'm 61, and I can tell you, my whole life, I wish I'd had more advocates for my healthcare, or more conversations that people aren't having like they should be, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it came from having been in the clinic and having patients come in, and we'd have a visit, and it'd be, relatively routine or straightforward. And at the end of the visit, they'd be like, well, what else should I be asking? And I was like, oh, but actually you needed to do your homework before you came in to see me. Right. And I think that's the challenge, and the piece that we're missing is we cannot rely on like the shit that we think we know for our reproductive health care, because it turns out the bulk of Americans don't know enough about reproductive health care to make educated decisions. So that's a huge piece of it. And I think talking about it with one another, talking about it with other, women and people with uteruses, to just be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm, what's my, process looking like. And A, we weren't ever taught those things. And B, we were told that talking about those things is kind of a like taboo subject. And C, we're told that everything feminine is kind of embarrassing. God forbid you have a yeast infection. You can't talk to anybody about your yeast infection, which is asinine. And so not only do we not get the education, but then we're shamed into it. And it just kind of creates this cycle, which we're going to see get a lot worse over the next several years as a result of this administration, and kind of just the lack of knowledge and the incredible increase in mis and disinformation on the web, unfortunately.
Right. Oh, I agree. And so I'm gonna kind of look at like some of these questions as we work into them. How this is one of them that talks about access to care. How should we be talking about it when we are even contemplating who we're going to go to, what kinds of even questions should we begin asking to do a better job of matching our needs to a physician, or a clinic or something that's going to do right by us with whatever our specific needs are. And it really can be for any stage in your health, really, in your life, really. Younger girls, girls that are in their reproductive phase of life, or women like me too.
Yeah, I think the first step, really, and this is something, again, that we're not actually taught, is understanding how the medical system actually works. So I would have patients come in all the time for their annual exam, which is billed as a preventative visit. And you have time to do preventative measures to talk about preventative things. You're reimbursed as a care clinician to talk about prevention. And then I would have patients at the end of a 20-minute visit bring up a laundry list of complaints and be frustrated if we couldn't meet all of their needs. And so the first thing I tell people is you're never going to get the care that you want and the care that you deserve if you're not actually interacting with the system in a way that benefits you. So if you have problems that you want to address, it's a problem visit, not a preventative visit. And that is such a simple concept that nobody ever teaches you. And so while we want to, especially as Americans, show up into a healthcare system and have all of our needs met at once, when we do that, we have a shitty way of getting none of those needs met. And so I think what's so important is figuring out, okay, I essentially get one topic, and as annoying as it is, I get one topic per visit. And I want to learn as much as I can about that topic. And then if I need additional visits, you can schedule as many visits as you want with your healthcare clinician, right? Schedule a bunch, schedule them all up front. Tell the person who's doing scheduling, you know what? This may be a long visit because I have a lot of questions. That's awesome, actually, because then it's in the clinician's schedule to have you down for longer. So we're not rushing out the door, right? So that's a huge baseline concept. I think another thing is, going back to that shame piece, we're kind of it's been a societal thing of this kind of subordination between the physician-patient experience, and it doesn't need to be. And you don't need to be afraid to share any of your personal history, medical history, sexual health history, any of that with your clinician. And if you feel like you cannot share something with the clinician because you're going to be shamed or judged, point blank, it's the wrong clinician. Find a new clinician immediately, right? Because this needs to be your open space and your open home, and you deserve a clinician that takes that, receives that, and supports you in those choices and things that you're doing or not doing, and ways to share and support you. So I think when you look at it through the landscape of how can I get the healthcare system to support me in the ways that I need healthcare, that's an important one. But then you look at okay, here's the system, and then here's the person, right? And as a clinician, I used to always kind of you can almost kind of this, you've seen these Instagram reels of people being so what do you think about choice? Testing friends of can we talk about these things? If you don't feel comfortable overtly asking your clinician things, then you can test it out. You can kind of figure out baby steps on that. It's also
and you should, right? I mean, you absolutely should do that, because
you have to ask them, who did you vote for? But you can say if I am X, Y, and Z, am I safe in this office?
Right. It should be really easy, right? It should be really easy to do that. But we tend to not do those things sometimes with people that we have for certain medical care, or other people that we have hired for certain services in our lives, and we tiptoe around it and tap dance around it, and that's ridiculous. I mean, I walked into my visit in 2023 with my petition and pulled it out of my bag and asked my gynecologist to sign it. And she was like, give me that. And I was like, I am in the right place. You know,
Yeah. And also the fact that she hadn't signed it already is alarming to me.
well, I had early petitions.
Okay,
I was
good.
early
like,
in the
how was this woman not like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
We
right.
had a couple of them in this county back in the days where it was like nobody could get their hands on them. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was wild. So I think it's really good. I had transitioned. I think this is good information for anyone to understand. Anyone who's seeking medical care of any kind, when you have anything that feels just not quite right, you know, sometimes we do go home and complain to our partner, or we go complain with a friend. But what we don't say is, I shouldn't be there anymore. And so when you reach that point, and I did reach that point with my doctor, and it's why I left that practice for very compelling reasons. um, and then also knew that when I was doing the signature collection, he was actively working against what we were trying to do here in Ohio. So I had left years before that and felt pretty solid in my decision. But we have to realize that we shouldn't just stay because it's going to be too much hassle, because we're not getting the care that we deserve if we do that. We should go to a place where we feel like they're not rushing us. We feel like we could go with our questions, but we do have to do our homework. I used to write them down, you know, and I would just say, I have these, I just want to address these things. And that should work with any medical professional, I think.
yes.
But
Perfect.
but women, again, because this subject, I think, in reproductive health has just been more, for whatever reason, more sensitive issue. We didn't ask the questions we now tend to do better at asking in the company of our friends, and you know, out in the world. I don't hesitate to ask those questions. I think it's really important. So so how about this one? This is a big one. I have heard this from young people around me, families looking to have children. What are you saying to them right now? Do you recommend waiting because of the climate we're in? Why or why not? I think it's something that I'm hearing being discussed, so I'm curious to know what you think about that.
Yeah. It's really complex. And I think there's so many different factors that go into that. And I think nobody should be pressured into family expansion at any point. And at the same time, we are older as a generation having babies to start. So unfortunately, for so many reasons, this presidency is going to last 4 years. And so it's not a difference of waiting a couple of months to expand your family, or even a year or two. And 4 years is a very long time in terms of fertility and fertility preservation. So I do tell people, if you are confident that you want to have a family, then I think you need to figure out, before you get pregnant, what your options would be if, God forbid, something were to happen in the pregnancy, if you did seek and desire termination, right? And then make an educated decision on if those options would work for you.
Right.
Because I don't think that putting off fertility for 4 years is necessarily a great thing either. And the concern is, of course, like, who knows what other hellhole we're going to be in another 4 years, unfortunately.
Right.
And so there's no guarantee that on the other side of this presidency, it's not like that if we have have a Dem president next, that we're going to, you know, wake up on January 20th of inauguration of 2029 and everything's going to be magically better and there'll be rainbows and roses. It's not, right? What the implications of this administration are going to be is going to be a very long duration, unfortunately. And so I think it's very short-sighted for people to say, I'm going to put off my family planning because of the current president. If you want to use that as an excuse because you don't want to have a family, that's fine, right? Like I think you should do some soul searching on some other reasons that maybe you don't want to expand your family at this time. And that's okay, right? Like I think not having children is a wonderful and beautiful option, but I don't think we should be blaming that on the president of the United States.
So with people as they're in this phase of their life, I know that in the immediate aftermath of the election, you talked a lot about birth control options. And so can you talk a little bit about some of those birth control options and some of the pros and cons of some of those different types, and I guess even some of the access to them in light of the climate?
Yes. And that is something I feel very passionate about, that you can make a different decision based off of who is in office. So oral contraceptives are a very easy option, probably the most accessible option, very simple to get a prescription from, very simple to take on a daily basis. And they're about 98% when taken perfectly, 98% effective at preventing pregnancy when taken perfectly, right? So you still do, if you're having sex with a male partner, right, or a partner that has sperm, you still do have a chance of getting pregnant. And you have to be taking a pill on a daily basis without messing it up to even get that 98%. As compared to something like an IUD, which is an intrauterine device. If you know you don't want to be pregnant, so on the flip side, right? If you're not considering the family expansion in the meantime, and you're like, okay, I'm certain that for now, I'm not going to be pregnant, or I don't want to be pregnant for a long time, or I've been pregnant and no more for me, right? An IUD is a fantastic option. We call it what's called a LARC, which stands for a long-acting reversible contraceptive. They are tremendous. They are 99.2% effective at preventing pregnancy. And you have to do nothing aside from getting it inserted to get that 99.2% effectiveness. So really, really a beautiful, empowering form of contraceptive that's kind of, I used to tell my patients, it's like a set it and forget it option, right? You can kind of put it in. Sure, it sucks and it's crampy to get inserted, and we can kind of talk about pain management for IUDs and the fact that we've been like telling women that pain doesn't exist in a gynecological standpoint. We can talk all about those things, and that's a hot topic too. And on Take Back Trust, I have like a beautiful breakdown of like all your different pain management options. So that's a really good tool and resource. But I think when we do talk about, okay, looking at our contraceptive options, that is absolutely something that I would consider keeping the current administration in mind. There is a concern that an IUD will be outlawed, unfortunately, because with an IUD, many and most people do still ovulate. So there is the chance of a fertilized egg. And then if that happens, due to the lovely, rights side, they consider life to begin at the point of conception. And so they are currently putting in policy and kind of working their way up that it is likely that IUDs will get banned, unfortunately, which is insane. So because they are good for between 3 and 12 years, depending on which one you choose, that is something that I am recommending that people do sooner rather than later, and really kind of prioritize that, because it's a great option. And it's going to be unfortunate to be on the other side of it and been like, man, I wish I could have gotten one of those. And you're just like a couple weeks, months too late for them, which is a bummer.
Right. I know that a lot of people really discussed too the Plan B medications and stocking up on them, or having them for folks who might need them in the event that we're looking at what might be happening. Despite what we feel like we've done in the state of Ohio, we feel that there's probably some risk that they try and undo the vote of the people here, because that's kind of what they do in our legislature these days.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's, people are saying it's very easy to get over the counter, and they have a decent expiration date on
Yeah,
them.
it's about a 2 to 4 year expiration on Plan
Mhm.
B over the counter. I do think it's a worthwhile thing to have. And Plan B is really only used after unprotected intercourse.
Right,
The
right.
problem is I think a lot of the times we do have unintended pregnancy where it's, condoms were used or you were on birth control, right? It's not an abortifacient. It's really used like the condom breaks or we had unprotected intercourse. And so it's a great option for that. And it's not necessarily a sustainable form of contraceptive, of
Right,
course.
right.
So I am encouraging people to have a combination, like a combo kit of both Plan B, and I am encouraging people to have, a set of abortifacients, medication abortion available, especially being, I say that to this group, knowing that we're all very left leaning. And like, I know for a fact, if any one of my friends, I mean, this is an obvious duh. If any one of my friends needs an abortion, they're going to come to me immediately, right?
Mhm.
I think you guys are all going to sit in that niche within your friend group because your friends are going to feel safe talking to you about that.
Right, right.
So whether or not you're the one that needs the abortion medication, you're going to be a safe space for your friends that have identified you as someone who is left leaning and liberal and a problem solver and a lean in go getter. Ipso facto, you're here in this conversation right now. So I do think there's really great ways to do that. This is really fascinating. I haven't actually ordered abortion pills yet, although I've been telling everybody to do it because I'm so embedded in the community that I'm like, shoot, if I need abortion pills, I can have them in a second, right? Which is a beautiful feeling and privilege, I understand. And just this week, I was like, I wonder what this process looks like. So I went on Plan C pills, and in the state of Michigan, you can still mail things, and that's fine. And Plan C recommended that I go to this like super secretive website where it takes you to this like janky page that essentially is an in-between and says the next page that you go to is going to be a page for period cramp massager, and those are abortion pills. And if you add that to your cart and check out with them, you are not getting a period cramp massager, you are getting abortion pills in the mail. And I was like, oh, this is an underground world of abortion. I'm here for it. And I was like stoked. They were $68. They were cheap, right? All the other like big brand names like Hey Jane and Carafem and whatever, which is great. They're doing amazing work and they're publishing that they have these things and advertising that they have these things, and they're $300. So like it makes it harder for people to stock up on it and just keep it in your medicine cabinet in case you need it, right? Versus $68 is still $68. It's not ideal, but like, man, I was pretty excited to put that period cramper, thing into my cart and be like, wow, it's pretty cool. So yeah.
The resourcefulness of people.
Amazing.
And I see we have a question in the chat, and I think this also ties into a question that we had on the Google form. So the question in the chat was, is there any threat to the potential of getting your tubes tied or removed? And I think the Google question was a little more around like a hysterectomy and her OBGYN saying, oh no, we don't do those anymore. So what's your stance on that?
Yep, good question. Tubal, so it used to be what was called a tubal ligation, which essentially they would go in and cut your tubes. So it used to be calling tubes tied, but it was really actually like tubal cutting. And then what happened is we had the risk of what was called reanastomosis. So those tubes could actually find each other again. And tubal ligation was 98% effective. at preventing pregnancy because there is such a high occurrence rate of those tubes finding each other. So now what we do when we're doing permanent sterilization on a person with a uterus and fallopian tubes is we go in and do a tubal removal. So it's called a bilateral oophorectomy or salpingectomy. So salpingectomy is a removal of the tubes. And so that's the equivalent now of tubes tied is actually tubal removal. It's also thought, just by the way, that ovarian cancer originates in the fallopian tubes. So that procedure is risk reducing for ovarian cancer. So that is kind of a cool bonus. That is a much easier recovery than a hysterectomy. So a tubal removal is a laparoscopic surgery where it's going to be similar to like an appendectomy, cholecystectomy, right? You're getting your appendix taken out, your gallbladder taken out. You have essentially like 3 ports into the abdomen where they can kind of like put a camera in and then go and remove those tubes. It's not a very invasive surgery. It's pretty quick in terms of return to life. A hysterectomy is a far more serious surgery or procedure where they have to remove an entire large organ that is highly vascularized. So the risks of hysterectomy are significantly higher. The recovery time is significantly longer. So in terms of hysterectomy for sterilization, not a very good option. Hysterectomy for things like menorrhagia, very heavy bleeding that you can't control for another reason, going to be on the books, right? Fibroid uterus, things like that. Like if there are issues within the uterus that can't be managed, that would be really the only reason why a hysterectomy would be a good option from a clinical and surgical perspective.
Right. I wondered whether or not because I think that question when it's somebody that is younger, if we are probably seeing doctors who are weighing in with pushback on that when someone comes in. And again, I think it goes right back to what you talked about earlier in this hour, where you say you've got to advocate for your own care and your doctor, right? You really do have to make your feelings clearly known. You have to make symptoms clearly known so that your doctor is doing what's best for you, right? I mean, and I think that we have not, again, have not always done a good job at that, and we need to do better at speaking up for ourselves. Let's see. This is a great question because of the people that are on this. What can grassroots organizations be doing now to prepare for the things to get worse surrounding reproductive rights? What resources should we be sharing out loud, and what things should be kept more underground? Obviously, your resource of Take Back Trust is a great resource to share out loud, which we've been doing. But what about some of the ways many of us were quieter about the work we were doing at the onset and of our signature collection, and then all of a sudden we were outed, and now we're way out there, and I'm fine with that. I mean, because people take notice. Like I said, when I'm wearing my shirt, people are looking at that and they're asking questions, and I can always answer then, you need to go to this website, you know.
Yeah, I think from a reproductive rights standpoint, and there's so many different facets to that, right? And so let's talk about, like, if I'm looking at an umbrella of like, what are ways that we can support reproductive rights? You have like, okay, what's the healthscape that we're in right now, and how can we make that acutely better for people who are experiencing healthcare right now? And then we've also got like, okay, how do we make things better for the future? So let's start with the bucket of like, okay, the healthscape we're in right now. As I had mentioned, abortion funds are really, really helpful. But connecting with your local abortion fund is really a beautiful thing, because they do not just fund abortion care, but they do a lot of logistical support. So as simple as like someone, let's say, needs to travel for an abortion, or they need childcare coverage, right? So like certain abortion funds will have people that just do childcare in the area, and they're like, hey, drop a kid off at my house, I'm a safe person, and that's my best way that I can support you while you're seeking abortion care, right? So like that's the abortion funds, and they're all really grassrooted and interwoven with the communities and clinics that they serve. So I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing in the Democratic Party is we're really redundant in the crap that we do. So many people are like trying to recreate something when there are already things that are there. And I think the best thing we can do is actually support an abortion fund that's already nested into a community and aware of what the clinic needs and patients need. In addition to abortion funds, what is hugely important in our kind of states that are swing states with big red populations is being a clinic escort. If you live anywhere near an abortion clinic, a clinic escort is essentially someone that will escort or chaperone a person from the car into an abortion facility. Why that is imperative now more than ever is we used to have something called the FACE Act, which prevented people from coming within essentially 100 feet of the doors of a medical facility. There were 27 people that had been arrested and held for violating the FACE Act of abortion clinics, nationwide. And one of Trump's pardons was pardoning all of those idiots.
I saw that.
So he has since pardoned all of the people that have done blockades of clinics, threatening patients, threatening staff of clinics. So, and they have said that they are no longer going to enforce the FACE Act. So we know that that kind of border zone around clinics, especially in states like ours, where we have a huge conservative contingency, they just come and like camp out in front of our abortion clinics. We have a person who, when the FACE Act was a thing, would have a ladder 100 feet out on the other side of a fence and would sit at the top of his, ladder at his 100 feet out from the door with an AK-47 and like a sign that says you're murdering baby, right? So like our patients are still coming in to get abortions, but if they need to walk alone in that, like that's really, really hard and traumatizing.
Right.
So I think being an abortion like being a clinic escort is a really beautiful way of providing support in the hellscape that we're in now. Right.
That's great.
Separately, like absorbing media and content that talks about abortion care. We know that all of these things, I see it on my own channels, are being hugely suppressed. So anytime you hear anybody talking about abortion online, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or talking about reproductive health care, engaging in that content is a really helpful way of amplifying that message. So whether it's commenting, sharing, reposting, that does huge, huge wonders, because if we mention the word abortion, it tanks the algorithm automatically, which is a bummer, right? So those would probably be my most acute bucket that you could do now. In terms of like things that you could, and in terms of like talking about that, or should it be grassroots or underground, like most of that is really just strategy that you could share with anybody, right? Like commenting on posts and whatever. If people are like, wow, that's weird, this woman comments on every abortion post, great, right? Like that's awesome. Be that person, be an overzealous commenter. We love that, right? When it comes to kind of like long-term strategy, Jessica Valenti has it's called Abortion Every Day. It's a little overkill. It's a little bit, the sky is falling in a way. So it's hard to absorb on a daily basis. But it's also really informative of what the other side opposition movement has been doing in terms of strategy. They have been they're playing the long game, right? And so our movement is now kind of trying to figure out, like, we haven't been playing the long game long enough. And so what are the ways that, like, you know, the high ups in the abortion and reproductive health care world are now doing that. But I think showing the cracks in what they've been doing, exposing their strategy is one of the best ways that we can get people to be like, oh, this wasn't an accident, right? Like the writing was on the wall that Roe was going to fall. Like none of us should have been surprised.
Right.
So I think
Right.
so many of us were like, oh, Roe fell, call to action immediately. And I think that that's the important part, is paying attention to now that we're invested in doing the work, paying attention to the shifts in the tides, right? And I think that that's an important piece from
and not being complacent at all. And I think we had a false sense of security. They started working to overturn Roe as soon as it passed in 1973. I mean, that is what happened. And we believed people at their word when they said it was settled law. Well, it wasn't settled law, you know. And so just one more thing that we can be angry about with this very tilted court and what they did. But I do think that it is hard not to feel the weight of it all, but you do. And I know you've spoken to this before, where you say how you do have to find your joy. There is joy in the community, doing the work, even when the work is heavy, like, for example, being an escort at a clinic. And we have not delved into that as mavens, but we've had those conversations. And I do think that the time has come to really lean into that more. I think that there are many of the people in our group who would be willing to do that. And I think we have 2 clinics fairly close by, not in Medina, but close enough. How are we doing, Belinda, with questions? I'm looking to see what other one.
Yeah, so I think we've been kind of hitting the ones in the chat as they've come in. So I think we've got like 2 more on the agenda. So we're about 8 minutes out from the end. We can probably go like a couple minutes over, but I know it's getting late for everybody. So
yeah. How about this one? This is the one I think that is kind of nice. What are some of the best and most effective ways that men can support the reproductive rights movement? Because we have seen that, but I always think that we can do more.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And in fact, I was just at the Abortion in America convening in Austin, Texas recently, and they had a men's panel. And it was a bunch of, you know, all the big abortion people in the world that are, you know, in community together. And there was this men's panel, and they got some pushback from some of the activists about it. And they were like, oh, but this is exactly why we need the men's panel. Is if we're not welcoming them into the conversation, they're not coming in. They're not coming in.
Right.
And the biggest problem is that the men that are anti-choice, point blank, will never listen to a woman about anything.
Right.
Right? Nor should we waste our time trying to convince them, because we have a movable middle that as women we can impact. And the men that are anti-choice men are not worth our time, worth our space. But the men that are supporting us can have those conversations, and they can shift the culture, and they can show up in ways where there can be a form of masculinity that has an awareness around reproductive health care, that can show up as an informed man and say, let's talk about, you know, like I imagine a man in college saying to his partner, let's talk about what form of contraceptive you're on, right? No partner ever said that to me. You know, and I think what a beautiful thing if we could teach men about that. So for those of us who have sons, that's a huge thing that's on my agenda as a parent to 2 boys, is really talking about reproductive health care. This isn't just for our daughters, right? These are for our sons also, and bringing them into that equation. And we did on Take Back Trust, we have a section called Take Back Trust for Men, with the intention of really bringing men into the conversation and bringing in strong advocates to see, hey, look, we're intentionally bringing men into this conversation. So I don't think it's necessarily our job to have to educate the men on it as much as it is to like give them permission to enter the space and let them educate themselves on some of it. There's an amazing organization called Men for Choice that has a fellowship and does like tons of training on
That's great.
getting pro-choice men out there. I'm working with their team right now on media training and getting their fellows to do more content that gets out in the world on what it feels like to be a pro-choice man, how they could show up. And through Take Back Trust, this is a new partnership we're excited about. We're going to host a blog from some of the fellows and graduates of that program so that we have like a running blog of pro-choice men, so that if other men are like, hey, I'm kind of curious, but I don't want to commit to this whole fellowship, but I'm like, want to read some articles about other pro-choice men, beautiful thing. So again, it kind of takes some of the management off of us because we manage enough as women, and we can share those with our partners and say, hey, educate yourself in some of these articles and take the onus on yourself. So there's definitely a lot that's happening there, which is a really exciting piece, because I do think that's part of the culture change as well.
Right. I think I noticed that even when we were doing signature collection, and I can say that probably since so many people that are on here were doing that work, we were consistently pleasantly surprised by the comments we had from men who were, you know, coming up and very enthusiastically grabbing the clipboard and saying, absolutely. And they were like, I I have a mother. It was like, I have a mother, I have a sister, I have daughters, and I have friends that I need to sign this for. And so I really saw that partnership, and I was pleasantly surprised by it. And then there were also the women who would be like, hey, you get over here,
100%.
sign this. And that's okay. That's also really okay as well. I think we can use humor. We can use, you have to look at this from a variety of ways. It can be a really heavy topic, but it doesn't always have to feel so heavy. We can sometimes dance around in our front yards with our pink signs.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually part of the beauty in talking about abortion and having abortion storytellers and people talking about reproductive rights is abortion is very multifaceted, and it's totally okay for abortion to feel joyful. And there's been this longstanding stigma of like nobody wants an abortion, and that's not true. There are a lot of people who want an abortion, who are happy that they had their abortion, who are very thrilled to not be pregnant because they didn't envision their life as being pregnant or having a child in this moment. So abortion in America, there was this one storyteller who was like, I was pregnant. I didn't want to be. I had an abortion. I came home and my roommates threw me an abortion party. So like that's worth talking about also, because I think about abortion as like a very complex, heavy issue, and exactly what you're saying, like it isn't always that. Like abortion is actually very joyful sometimes, and it gives us the autonomy and ability to choose life and when to become a parent, how to become a parent, how we want to expand our family. Like it really is a beautiful, joyful thing. And so I think that's a great point, Shelley, is I think we talk about abortion and sometimes it feels like a heavy topic to take on, and it really doesn't always have to be. And it's okay for it to be this like, I mention the word abortion all the time. I talk about abortion all the time, and it's like it's very light and fluffy for me because I talk about it all the time, but because I know like this is empowerment. Abortion is empowerment.
It is
Abortion
life-saving,
love, like it is life-saving, but it isn't always like just life-saving when you think about it from like complex medical needs or a ruptured ectopic or whatever. Like it's life-saving if you don't want to be pregnant because you don't want to be pregnant. Like it's brilliant,
I think of Hadley Duvall, who I know you did some time with on the reproductive rights bus tour. And again, her mess has become a message, and she's become a really powerful voice you know, and I think that it, like you say, how multifaceted it is. It truly is a part of our reproductive stories. And I think we do have to unstigmatize a lot of our reproductive health care that we were afraid to talk about before, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about at all.
So I do think that's like another piece in the bucket of what can we do now, right? Like noticing some of those stigmas and calling them out when we hear it, right? Like if you have a friend be like, nobody wants an abortion, very simple. Actually, a lot of people do. You know, like just I think even like making those tweaks of language to normalize abortion and normalize reproductive health care and really kind of take the ownership back is tremendously helpful in terms of the movement going forward. So I do think that's a great point, and another thing that you can do now to help in terms of moving reproductive health care forward.
Great. How we doing, Belinda?
I think let's wrap this one up. There was one question in the chat that I'd like to hit, asking, what are your favorite resources for teaching young children about reproductive health?
Ooh, that's great.
Oh, like how young are we talking about, do we think? Let's put it in the chat. Like, are we talking about like my kids who are 7 and 5, which I talk about vaginas and penises and like normal anatomical language? Or whoever asked that question, if you could put it in the chat. I do think there's one called Bedsider, if it's like teenagers. Bedsider. Oh, toddlers. Beautiful. Yeah. Okay. So I'm very well equipped with this because again, my kids are 6, 4, and 2. Anatomical language. That's the most important thing that you can do, right? Is talking about while they're in the bath. You know, I'm going to wash your face. I'm going to wash your tummy, and I'm washing your penis right now. Or, oh, I'm going to wash whatever. I'm going to wash your vagina. We don't need soap in a vagina, right? Like little things, you know, and it doesn't have to be stigmatized language around genitals. Definitely talking about and conversing about consent of nobody should see your private parts aside from mommy and the doctor. If the doctor sees it or asks to see it, mommy is always in the room, or daddy, right? Like that's a consent. Really, we can start talking about consent for toddlers is an important one. There's a really good book. I have it for my daughter that I read. Actually, all of my kids have read it. It's just that my daughter is 4, so it's age appropriate most for her. But it's I forget what it's called. It's like Our Bodies Are Our Own, but it talks about essentially like naming that language, naming consent. In terms of reproduction, my daughter asked me this week, like, mommy, like, how does a baby get in your tummy? Which was like the first question that was like really kind of really serious. And I was like, it's called conceiving. And I just gave her like another word that was like an anatomical word. And then it was like enough to like ease her curiosity. And I'm sure eventually she'll ask me what's conceiving and all of the things, but I really do find that I stick to anatomical language and explanations because they do say that as a improver for facts of childhood sexual assault, unfortunately, the more anatomical language that they have, the better we are able to detect and prevent childhood sexual assault, right? So for example, there are some people that teach their kids to call it a cookie, let's say, right? And then they say, you know, so-and-so touched my cookie today, and nobody understands that or takes it seriously, as compared to so-and-so touched my vagina today. There's no misunderstanding of that. And so from a reproductive health care standpoint and a childhood sexual assault prevention awareness standpoint, I do think that all those things really go hand in hand. But there are not great resources online of like, talk to your kids about X, Y, and Z. And so it's really just like you know, you feel out what's best, but I always lean back on personally anatomical language.
Right. And we know that it's got to be happening probably with the families more so than what we're going to be seeing in schools.
That's right.
Where it used to be, but not until 4th grade. And I'm like, really? Now when I think about it, I'm like, that's too late.
Yep.
You know, so.
Yeah, also like I joined my school district sex ed advisory board. That's a great option. I was like, I'm not going to do the PTA. I don't want to make copies, but talk about sex. I sure as hell want to do that. Right. So like when we're talking about ways to engage in community, they're always looking for members to join things like sex ed advisory boards, and they need people from various backgrounds, and you just have to be within the district here in Michigan. So I don't know what the laws are, but that would be great, right? Like flood your school districts with people that are like sex positive and progressive thinkers, and then see, okay, how much can we get out of this curriculum? That's a great way of doing it.
Excellent. You're
Awesome.
amazing, Nikki. You really
Thanks,
are.
Shelly. Oh, I love
Thank
you.
you so
Yeah.
much for spending the evening with us.
Yeah, it was a
And
fun
same
one.
to Shelly. So we super appreciate. I have dropped the links in the chat again. You can donate to Take Back Trust, to Nikki's organization, takebacktrust.com/donate. You can also donate to DEM. That helps us, support our, organization, our overhead, all of that. We will be passing on half of the donations we receive tonight to Take Back Trust. So you can give to both of us. You can give a little more to us and have us split it, whatever works best for you. But we appreciate you all being here and spending your evenings with us. And thank you so much, Nikki.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks.
for having me. Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Have a good night,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.